horror story. The low hum of the generator was a constant companion, a mechanical heartbeat against the vast, crushing silence of the Antarctic night. I remember watching the heavy gauge on the airlock door, the needle quivering just above the secure mark. Then the faintest scrape, like something dragging against the reinforced steel, echoed through the corridor. My breath hitched. It was a sound I'd heard before, a sound that meant one of them was closer than it should be, pressing against the barrier between their world and what little remained of ours. My hand instinctively went to the emergency lockdown button, my heart hammering against my ribs, knowing full well it might already be too late. Have you ever found yourself in a place so entirely removed from civilization that the very concept of safety becomes a fragile, distant memory? A place where the sun sets for months, plunging the world into an endless alien twilight, and the only company you have are the ghosts of your own sanity and the chilling secrets kept by the ice itself. This isn't just a story about a remote job. It's about the slow, insidious erosion of everything you thought was real. This is the kind of story that makes you check your locks twice before going to bed. If you want more stories like this, stories that will keep you up at night, hit that subscribe button right now. I post new horror accounts every week, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Go ahead, I'll wait. Subscribed, good. Now drop your city and the time where you're watching in the comments below. Let's see who's brave enough to listen in the dark. Now turn off the lights if you dare. Ignore the noises your house makes in the silence. And let's find out together what truly hides in the darkness. My name is Arthur, and I spent 18 months working at Outpost 73, a scientific research facility nestled deep in the frozen heart of Antarctica. The year was 2012. I was a structural engineer by trade, with a specialty in extreme environment construction. The pay for such a posting was exorbitant, enough to clear my lingering student debts and set up a comfortable down payment on a house, which was precisely why I signed on. I had always been drawn to remote places, the kind of untamed wilderness that stripped away the pretense of civilization and left you with only the raw, fundamental truths of existence. Antarctica, I thought, would be the ultimate test, a stark, beautiful challenge. I envisioned working alongside a small, dedicated team of scientists, pushing the boundaries of human knowledge in an isolated, yet intellectually stimulating environment. Therefore, when the opportunity arose through a recruitment agency specializing in polar logistics, I didn't hesitate. I saw it as an adventure, a unique chapter in my life. The journey itself was an ordeal, a testament to the brutal isolation of the continent. First, a flight to Punta Arenas, Chile, then a military transport plane, a C-130 Hercules that rattled its way across the Drake Passage, eventually touching down on a makeshift ice runway near the coast. From there it was a 7-day traverse inland via monstrous piss-and-bully snowcat, dragging supply sleds across an endless, featureless white expanse. The scale of it was humbling, terrifying even. For days the horizon was an unbroken curve of white meeting white, the sky a vast, indifferent dome of pale blue or bruised gray. There was nothing, absolutely nothing, but us and the ice. This vast emptiness, initially awe-inspiring, soon began to feel like a shroud, a heavy blanket pressing down on the very concept of life. When we finally reached Outpost 73, it was a cluster of prefabricated modules, anchored to the ice with colossal steel pilings, burrowed slightly into a wind-scoured ridge. It was less a research facility and more a fortress, a stark industrial complex of corrugated steel and reinforced panels, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of high-pressure sodium lamps. The air hissed with the constant whine of generators and ventilation systems. There were no windows on the ground level, only thick, pressure-sealed doors and observation domes on the upper modules. It felt less like a place for scientific discovery and more like a high-security prison for something that needed to be kept in. I remember the immediate chill, not just from the outside air, but a deeper, more pervasive cold that seeped into my bones, a premonition of unease. I was met by Dr. Evelyn Reed, the lead researcher, a woman whose sharp intellect was matched only by her almost clinical detachment. She was thin, with tired eyes that seemed to have seen too much, and a permanent frown etched between her brows. Her welcome was brief and functional, devoid of the usual camaraderie one might expect in such an isolated posting. She handed me a laminated booklet titled Outpost 73, Operational Protocols and Behavioral Directives. "Read this, Arthur," she said, her voice flat, "every word. Your life and everyone else's depends on it." The weight of those words, delivered without an ounce of dramatic flair, settled heavily in the pit of my stomach, transforming my initial sense of adventure into a nascent dread. I retreated to my assigned quarters, a cramped single bunk with a small desk and a shelf, and began to read. The booklet was dense, filled with technical specifications for the outpost's various systems, power grid redundancies, atmospheric recycling, waste management. But interwoven with these mundane details were the behavioral directives, and this is where the strangeness truly began. The first rule, prominently displayed and underlined, was about sound discipline. Absolute silence in all corridors and common areas between 22 o'clock and 6 o'clock local time. Whispering is permitted in designated rest areas only. No music, television, or recreational noise. Radios and personal electronics must be used with headphones at all times, with volume levels below audible threshold. My first thought was that this was extreme, even for a sensitive research environment. But then I read the rationale. Undue vibrations or acoustic disturbances can compromise the stability of certain experimental parameters. Experimental parameters. What kind of experiments required this level of auditory isolation? Another directive, equally emphasized, concerned movement within the outpost. All personnel are to adhere strictly to marked pathways. Deviation from these paths, even by a few feet, is prohibited. Red-lined areas are restricted access and require specific clearance. Under no circumstances are personnel to attempt to access Level 3, Substructure Gamma, or the hydroponics bay after a code yellow alert. This went beyond mere safety protocol. It implied a hidden geography within the outpost, parts of which were not just dangerous, but entirely off-limits under specific, undisclosed conditions. I found myself wondering, what could possibly be so sensitive on Level 3 or in a hydroponics bay that it warranted such severe restrictions, especially during an alert? The stakes, I realized, were not just inconvenience or disciplinary action, but a direct threat. My training for my night shift position was equally unsettling. I was assigned to environmental integrity monitoring, essentially overseeing the facility's structural health and energy systems during the deep Antarctic night cycle. My immediate supervisor was a taciturn man named Jensen, a grizzled veteran of polar expeditions, whose face seemed permanently etched with the cold. He showed me the various pressure gauges, temperature sensors, and hundreds of CCTV monitors. "The readings are mostly for structural stress," he explained, his voice a low rumble, "but we also monitor anomalous activity." He gestured vaguely at a bank of screens displaying thermal imaging feeds from sensors embedded deep beneath the outpost, far below even the deepest foundation pilings. These feeds showed swirling patterns of heat signatures, like currents in an underground river. "Most of that is geothermal activity," he said, "but sometimes things shift." His eyes lingered on one particular screen for a moment too long, a screen that showed nothing but a deep, inky blackness, yet seemed to hold his full, silent attention. It was the first hint that there was something else down there. The rules escalated. No personnel are to engage in direct eye contact with specimens under any circumstances. If a specimen is observed outside its designated containment, immediately initiate Code Black protocol and await further instructions. Do not attempt to communicate. Do not attempt to intervene. Maintain absolute silence and stillness. Specimen. The word hung in the air, cold and sharp. This wasn't just a research outpost, it was a containment facility. The experiments weren't just parameters, they were things, living things. And the rules weren't just about protecting the experiments, they were about protecting us from them. This shift in understanding was like a sudden drop in altitude, the pressure building in my ears, a profound sense of foreboding settling in. I remember staring at the word specimen in the booklet, my mind trying to reconcile it with the pristine image of scientific endeavor I'd held before coming here. What kind of specimens required no eye contact? What kind of creatures warranted a full facility lockdown and strict non-intervention protocols? My initial assumption that these were rare geological formations or unusual atmospheric conditions shattered. It was biological. It was mobile, and it was dangerous enough that direct observation was forbidden. The ambiguity was terrifying. Was it a rare deep-sea fish, a primordial Antarctic microorganism? Or was it something far more alien, far more menacing, something that looked back? The booklet offered no answers, only unwavering, ironclad directives. Therefore, my first night shift was less about monitoring structural integrity and more about internalizing the creeping unease these rules had instilled. I sat in the silent control room, the rhythmic hum of the generators a constant counterpoint to the frozen world outside. Jensen had left me with a final, chilling piece of advice. Don't try to understand them, Arthur. Just follow the rules. They're there for a reason, and that reason isn't always obvious until it's too late. He looked at me then, his eyes holding a depth of weariness I hadn't seen before, a silent plea for compliance. He wasn't just my supervisor, he was a survivor. It made me wonder what he had survived. The rules stated that all night shift personnel were to conduct a full perimeter check every 2 hours, alternating between internal and external routes. My first external check confirmed the formidable defenses of the outpost. Triple airlock doors, motion-activated floodlights, sensor arrays embedded in the ice. But also I noticed the massive, heavily fortified gate at the far end of the perimeter fence, leading to nowhere but the endless ice. It was always locked, always watched by multiple cameras. Jensen had simply called it the service entrance, but it had the look of something designed to keep things out, or perhaps to prevent something from getting in through the wrong way. This particular detail, the sheer overkill of that gate with no discernible purpose, stuck with me. What was so important about this utterly redundant service entrance that it required such extreme security measures? It was a seed of doubt, planted firmly in the bedrock of my initial, naive optimism. My initial weeks at Outpost 73 established a grim routine, a rhythm dictated by the constant hum of machinery and the unspoken anxieties of my colleagues. The sun, a distant memory, had retreated entirely, plunging us into months of perpetual twilight, occasionally broken by the eerie green glow of the aurora australis. This meant our internal schedules were strictly regulated, with artificial light cycles designed to mimic day and night, vital for maintaining any semblance of normal circadian rhythms in such an unnatural environment. I learned to navigate the labyrinthine corridors by memory, each junction feeling identical, often disorienting. The air always smelled faintly of ozone and recycled oxygen, a sterile, metallic scent that permeated everything. I began to notice subtle shifts in the outpost sounds. The generators sometimes whined a little higher, the ventilation system occasionally coughed, and these small deviations became significant markers in the monotonous expanse of my shifts, often coinciding with a quiet tension among the other crew members. The rules, far from becoming normalized, only deepened their strange hold. The sound discipline, for instance, evolved from a mere instruction to an almost religious observance. One evening during my rounds, I heard a faint, persistent beeping coming from the recreation lounge. It was another structural engineer, a young man named Liam, who had inadvertently left his tablet charging on a table, its low battery alert chirping insistently. Before I could even approach him, Dr. Reed was there, not yelling, but speaking in a low, furious whisper that was far more chilling than any shout. "Liam, what the hell do you think you're doing?" she hissed, her eyes darting nervously towards the ventilation grates. "Do you want to bring them right to our doorstep? Turn it off now." Liam, pale and shaken, fumbled with the device, his apology barely audible. The reaction was disproportionate to the offense, indicating a profound and pervasive fear that permeated even the highest ranks of the outpost's command. It wasn't just about disturbing experimental parameters anymore. It was about attracting something. Therefore, this incident, trivial in isolation, served as a stark reminder of the underlying stakes. The specimens were not just contained, they were actively listening, or perhaps actively sensing. This subtle shift in understanding amplified my sense of vulnerability. It wasn't just about keeping the creatures in. It was about keeping them away. The rules around silence suddenly took on a new, terrifying meaning. They were protective barriers, a form of active camouflage in an environment where sound could be a beacon. I found myself instinctively lowering my voice, treading lightly, even when alone. The silence became less a rule and more a survival instinct. But the most perplexing rules concerned the external observation protocols. We were strictly forbidden from looking directly out of the panoramic observation domes on level 1, especially during certain phases of the environmental cycle, which I later understood to mean times when the aurora was particularly active or during periods of dense snow activity. Prolonged direct observation can lead to perceptual distortion and psychological distress, the manual stated, a clinical euphemism that felt grossly inadequate. Instead, we were to rely solely on the outpost's external cameras, which fed into monitors in the control room. These cameras, however, were equipped with a dynamic light filtration system that constantly adjusted for glare and contrast, often rendering the outside world in strange, monochromatic hues or blurred abstraction. It was a mediated reality, preventing any true, unfiltered view of the Antarctic landscape. One night, driven by a growing, morbid curiosity, I decided to test this rule myself. During one of my perimeter checks, ensuring the outer airlocks were sealed, I paused beside one of the level 1 observation domes. The manual explicitly warned against looking out, but I told myself it was just a guideline, not a hard rule. I pressed my face close to the thick, triple-paned viewport, cupping my hands around my eyes to block the internal glare. Outside, the aurora was putting on a particularly spectacular display, ribbons of green and violet dancing across the black sky. It was breathtaking. But then, as my eyes adjusted to the infinite darkness beyond the light-filtered glass, I saw it, or thought I saw it, a faint, almost imperceptible shift in the snowfield far beyond the perimeter lights. It wasn't movement, not exactly, more like a ripple in the fabric of reality itself, a momentary distortion against the otherwise static white. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, but it left a cold, prickling sensation on my skin. Was it just the light playing tricks, the limited visibility? Or was it something else, something the cameras were specifically designed to obscure? The seed of doubt about my own perception was firmly planted. The incident, however fleeting, intensified my paranoia. I started scrutinizing the external camera feeds more closely. The dynamic light filtration system always seemed to kick in precisely when something indistinct appeared at the far edges of the frame, blurring it into an unidentifiable smudge. Sometimes the feed would momentarily glitch, a brief flicker of static, only to resolve with nothing there. Was it equipment malfunction or deliberate obfuscation? The ambiguity was a constant torment. I found myself obsessively rewatching recorded footage, freezing frames, zooming in on anomalies that always resolved into vague blurs or phantom shadows. The clarity test was failing for me, the viewer, as I struggled to discern what was actually happening. My internal goal became to understand what these filters were hiding, why they were so necessary. I started logging the specific timings of unusual camera behavior, looking for patterns. The stake was my own sanity, my ability to trust my eyes, and the technology I was meant to oversee. Each blurred anomaly chipped away at my sense of security, replaced by a growing conviction that there was a deliberate effort to keep us ignorant. The sheer lack of clarity was maddening. It was during one such night shift, poring over thermal imaging feeds from the substructure layers, that I stumbled upon something disturbing. Tucked away in an obscure subsection of the manual, under Emergency Redundancy Protocols, there was a brief mention of a system called Acoustic Dampening Matrix, or ADM. This system, unlike the passive sound discipline, was an active noise cancellation array embedded throughout the deeper levels of the outpost, designed to neutralize specific low-frequency resonant patterns. Jensen had never mentioned it. When I asked him about it the next day, his face tightened. Just a backup system, Arthur. Rarely used. Don't worry about it. His dismissal was too quick, too evasive. Therefore, I decided to investigate further. Using my access codes, I managed to pull up the ADM's operational logs. They showed intermittent activations, usually for short bursts, but with alarming regularity. The most frequent activations correlated precisely with the thermal anomalies I'd observed earlier in the substructure feeds, those swirling heat signatures that Jensen had dismissed as geothermal activity. But the ADM wasn't designed for geology. It was designed to neutralize resonant patterns. What kind of patterns? What kind of sounds were coming from deep beneath the ice that required an active, facility-wide dampening system? This was no longer just about creatures that reacted to sound. It was about creatures that made sounds, sounds so profound and disturbing they needed to be actively suppressed. The realization gnawed at me. The thermal signatures weren't just heat, they were life. Something was moving, living, and resonating in the deep ice directly beneath Outpost 73, and the outpost was actively fighting, or at least mitigating, its presence. This created a new problem. The rules weren't just for our protection from the creatures, but for protecting the creatures from something else, or perhaps protecting the outpost from their influence. The goal shifted from mere survival to deciphering the true nature of this terrifying ecology. What was at stake now was not just my life, but perhaps the entire foundation of the outpost, both literally and psychologically. My shifts became a tense dance between performing my duties and covertly seeking answers. I began to notice my colleagues. Dr. Reed's perpetual weariness wasn't just fatigue, it was a deep, bone-settling dread. Liam, after his tablet incident, had become withdrawn, his eyes often darting nervously towards the ventilation grates, exactly as Dr. Reed's had. We were all trapped in a shared, unspoken terror. The unspoken acknowledgement that the rules existed for a reason that none of us dared to articulate, was itself a form of psychological torture. The entire outpost was a pressure cooker of unspoken fears, each of us isolated yet connected by the growing weight of what we suspected. I started having trouble sleeping. The relentless silence of the outpost, punctuated only by the rhythmic thrum of the generators and the occasional, almost imperceptible shudder of the facility, became a source of profound unease. I'd lie in my bunk listening, straining to hear anything beyond the expected, a primal instinct asserting itself despite my rational mind. Sometimes I thought I heard faint thumps, deep and resonant, coming from below, sounds that vibrated through the steel deck plates, only to disappear before I could properly identify them. Were these the resonant patterns the ADM was neutralizing, or was my exhausted mind playing tricks on me? The ambiguity was relentless, eroding my sense of reality. My sanity, I realized, was becoming the ultimate stake. The insidious nature of psychological horror lies not in what you see, but in what you don't see, in the terrifying implications of absence and distortion. At Outpost 73, the absence of clear answers, combined with the constant distortion of reality through filtered views and suppressed sounds, began to fray my nerves. The long Antarctic night stretched on, a seemingly endless expanse of artificial light and real darkness. My internal clock became completely disoriented, reliant only on the shifting shifts and the pale, simulated dawn that never truly arrived. I began to experience hypnagogic hallucinations, those brief, vivid sensory experiences that occur on the edge of sleep. Shadows in my periphery would coalesce into indistinct shapes, only to vanish when I focused. Whispers too faint to properly register seemed to drift from the corners of my bunk, though I knew it was only the drone of the air filtration system. This self-doubt, this questioning of my own perception, was the most terrifying aspect of all. One particular rule, initially tucked away in an appendix, began to take on a sinister significance. All personnel are to ensure personal effects, especially items with reflective surfaces or those that generate internal light, e.g. mobile devices, reflective watches, are kept stored and out of sight when not in active use. Under no circumstances are such items to be left exposed in common areas or near ventilation grates. At first, I dismissed this as a minor aesthetic directive, perhaps to maintain a professional appearance or prevent light pollution in observation zones. But the recurrence of the phrase near ventilation grates struck me. Why there specifically? And what exactly was the danger of a reflective surface? It was a seemingly innocuous detail, yet it gnawed at me with increasing intensity, like a splinter under the skin. Therefore, I revisited the ADM logs. My clandestine observations during my night shifts had revealed a disturbing pattern. ADM activations often spiked not just with thermal anomalies, but also with unusual electromagnetic fluctuations. These fluctuations were subtle, almost imperceptible, but they were there, picked up by sensors I hadn't even known existed until I started digging through the system schematics. It implied a more complex interaction, a deeper connection between the specimens and the outpost's environment. This wasn't just about sound, it was about energy. The implications were chilling. What if the creatures weren't just reacting but interfering? My internal goal intensified. I needed to understand what the creatures were, what they reacted to, and why these rules were put in place. The stakes were no longer just my sanity, but potentially the lives of everyone at the outpost if I failed to decipher the true purpose of these highly specific directives. The clarity test I was imposing on myself was failing spectacularly, as every answer I uncovered only led to more questions, more ambiguity. Each problem I thought I solved simply revealed a deeper, more unsettling layer of the mystery. One morning during what passed for our breakfast hour, I noticed Dr. Reed looking unusually distraught. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she picked at her food without eating. Liam, who usually sat with her, was absent. When I discreetly inquired about him, another technician, a gruff logistics officer named Miller, simply grunted, "Transfer," went back to McMurdo, family emergency. But the way he said it, refusing to meet my gaze, suggested otherwise. Later that day, I saw Liam's bunk being stripped clean, his few personal effects neatly boxed and carried away by two silent security personnel. There was no farewell, no opportunity to speak with him. He simply vanished. His tablet, the one that had caused the alarm, was also gone. Liam's sudden disappearance, the lack of a proper explanation, created a void of unease. This incident shattered any remaining illusion of normalcy. People didn't just transfer from Outpost 73 without notice, especially not in midwinter. The real stake became clear. If you made a mistake, if you drew too much attention, you were simply removed, erased, leaving no trace. What happened to Liam? Was he truly evacuated, or was his family emergency a cover story for something far more sinister? The paranoia intensified, extending beyond the specimens to the human element of the outpost. We were all under observation, but by whom or what was unclear. The entire environment was becoming hostile, not just the ice outside, but the very walls of our supposed sanctuary. The specific fear I focused on next was the directive about reflective surfaces and ventilation grates. A deep-seated unease had begun to form around it. Why? What could possibly be the danger? I theorized that the specimens might be sensitive to light, or perhaps that their composition was somehow disrupted by reflections. But the emphasis on ventilation grates suggested something more active, something that might enter through them. My mind conjured images of unseen eyes peering in through the grates, drawn by the slightest glint. The goal was to understand this risk. One particularly quiet night shift, The outpost seemed to hold its breath. The generators emitted their steady hum, but beneath it, the silence felt heavy, expectant. The ADM log showed an unusual spike in activations, not just from the substructure, but from Level 2, specifically in the area designated Specimen Observation Bay C. This bay, according to the schematics, was deep within the facility, completely sealed. My heart hammered against my ribs. Something was happening there. My internal goal was to get more information, to understand what was causing this unprecedented ADM activity. The stakes were higher than ever. A potential breach, or at least a significant escalation of activity within the facility itself. I carefully made my way to a less-used service tunnel that ran parallel to the main corridors, known to have hidden access panels for maintenance. My plan was to get close enough to Base C to see if any visual anomalies were registered on the local CCTV feed, which was often more detailed than the central control room's generalized overview. The journey itself was fraught with tension. Every creak of the metal floor plates, every distant clang of the ventilation system made me jump. The tunnel was dark, lit only by dim emergency lights spaced every 30 feet, casting long, distorted shadows. I gripped my flashlight tightly, its beam a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. This journey was a terrifying gamble. When I finally reached a maintenance panel near Bay C, I cautiously opened it, revealing a small monitor and a few control switches. The monitor displayed a live feed from inside Base C's outer antechamber. It was empty, sterile, just reinforced steel and pressure seals. But then the feed flickered, a sudden burst of static, followed by a momentary image before it corrected itself. It was only for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. In that brief, horrifying flash, I saw it. The antechamber wasn't empty. Pressed against the thick, reinforced viewport of the inner containment chamber was a shape. It was indistinct, a swirling mass of dark, vaguely gelatinous material, but it possessed an unsettling reflectivity, like wet obsidian. And within it, not eyes, but receptacles that seemed to absorb and distort the emergency lights of the chamber, creating a sickening kaleidoscope of refracted patterns. The sheer wrongness of it was primal. It was amorphous, shifting, yet undeniably present. It was alive. My breath caught in my throat. This was no fish, no microorganism. This was something that defied categorization, something that looked like a living void. I slammed the panel shut, my hands trembling, my mind reeling. The specimens were not just contained. They were sentient, or at least aware enough to be drawn to light and reflection, and they were far more alien, more grotesque, than my worst nightmares had imagined. The rule about reflective surfaces now made terrifying sense. They weren't just sensitive to light, they were attracted to it, perhaps even fed by it in some unimaginable way. The ventilation grates, too, they weren't just entry points. They were potential conduits, apertures through which these horrors could perceive or even exert influence, attracted by any errant glint. I scrambled back to the control room, my heart hammering, the unsettling image seared into my mind. The clarity I had sought was a curse. I now understood the what and the why of some of the rules, but that understanding only amplified the terror. The specimens were a fluid, reflective, light-devouring horror, and they were, beyond a shadow of a doubt, locked away in the very core of our outpost. The psychological damage had already begun. The doubt, the paranoia, the loss of security, it was all consuming. I was no longer merely observing. I was now utterly entangled in the nightmare of Outpost 73. Part 3. Mid-roll call to action CTA, optimized for conversion. Before we continue, I need to tell you something. What happens next in this story? It changed everything. But here's the thing. If you're not subscribed, you're going to miss the follow-up I'm posting next week. Yes, there's more to this, and it's worse. So do yourself a favor, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Because when I post the next part, you'll want to know immediately. Trust me on this. Now back to the nightmare. The glimpse of the specimen in Bay C was a seismic event in my personal reality. It wasn't a shadow, a trick of the light, or a hallucination. It was a tangible, horrifying entity that existed, and it was held in the facility I was meant to help maintain. The abstract fear of experimental parameters or anomalous activity solidified into a concrete terror, a grotesque, reflective mass that defied all natural laws. The image of those light-warping receptacles, not eyes, but something far more unsettling, was burned into my retinas. My focus shifted from merely deciphering the rules to a desperate, singular goal. Understanding the full scope of the danger, and by extension, my chances of survival, the mental clarity I had yearned for was now a burden, a terrifying picture of the abyss. My shifts became a living purgatory. Every subtle vibration of the outpost, every unexplained hum, sent a jolt of panic through me. I found myself obsessively cleaning my workstation, ensuring no stray reflective surfaces were exposed, no accidental light could attract unwanted attention. I even taped over the small indicator lights on my equipment. The fear of being discovered, of having seen what I wasn't meant to see, was a constant companion, a secondary terror to the primary one of the creatures themselves. I realized that my own actions had now put me at stake, making me a potential liability in the eyes of the outpost's command. Just like Liam, the rules around Level 3, Substructure Gamma, and the hydroponics bay, previously abstract restrictions, now became a chilling puzzle. Why these specific locations? Was it because they housed more of these specimens? Or was there something else, something even more fundamental, being hidden there? The initial normalcy of my job had evaporated, replaced by an acute awareness of the precarious balance the outpost maintained. I was no longer an impartial observer. I was a hostage in a scientific prison, coexisting with unknown horrors. One particularly turbulent night, a fierce blizzard raged outside, rattling the outpost's reinforced panels and making the entire structure vibrate. The external cameras were completely useless, obscured by swirling snow, reducing our view of the outside world to a whiteout. Inside, the usual mechanical humming of the facility was punctuated by the howl of the wind, creating an unsettling cacophony. It was during this storm that the unexpected happened. The power grid, usually robust and redundant, experienced a catastrophic failure. Not a full blackout, but a widespread surge and dip that caused critical systems to falter. Emergency lights flickered on, casting long, dancing shadows, bathing the corridors in an ominous red glow. My console immediately lit up with alerts, pressure fluctuations in the airlock systems, temperature drops in critical containment zones, and most ominously, a series of rapid, successive alarms from Level 3, Substructure Gamma. The very area forbidden under Code Yellow, now screaming critical alerts during a full-blown power crisis. My heart seized. This was not a drill. What was at stake now was not just understanding, but immediate action. My goal was clear. Stabilize the power, contain the alerts, and avert a total catastrophe. As I frantically rerouted power to the failing containment systems, my eyes darted to the ADM logs. They showed the acoustic dampening matrix going into full overload, flashing red warnings across the screen. The resonant patterns it was trying to neutralize were no longer subtle, low-frequency hums. They were profound, deep resonances, originating not just from the substructure, but from within Level 3 itself. The ADM was struggling, almost overwhelmed. It was like listening to a heartbeat, deep and powerful, resonating through the very foundations of the outpost. This was the sound of the specimens, I realized, not just reacting, but living intensely. Then, through the cacophony of alarms and the frantic whirring of failing systems, I heard it, a distinct sound, cutting through the mechanical chaos. A wet slurp, followed by a high-pitched, almost crystalline chime, originating from the main ventilation shaft that ran directly above my control room. It was a sound entirely alien, unlike anything I had ever heard, yet it conveyed a chilling sense of something massive, something hungry, moving within the structure of the outpost. The sound, amplified by the metal shaft, seemed to vibrate directly inside my skull. This wasn't merely a sound, it was an active presence. Panic surged through me, cold and sharp. The rules about silence, about ventilation grates, about not making eye contact flashed through my mind with terrifying clarity. What was happening? Had a specimen escaped its primary containment due to the power failure? Was it moving through the ventilation system? My immediate goal shifted from power stabilization to self-preservation. I realized I was utterly alone on the night shift, the only human presence between whatever was in the vents and the fragile security of the outpost. The stakes were absolute. My mind raced, trying to formulate a plan. I remembered the rule: if a specimen is observed outside its designated containment, immediately initiate Code Black protocol. But I hadn't observed it. I'd heard it, and the sound was coming from inside the walls, not outside a designated containment zone. I hesitated, the ambiguity of the situation paralyzing me. Was a sound enough to trigger Code Black? What if I was wrong? The consequence of a false alarm could be severe, especially in this strained environment. But the consequence of not acting, if I was right, could be catastrophic. I made a split-second decision. I reached for the Code Black button, my finger hovering over the glowing red panel. But as I did, another, even more disturbing sound emanated from the ventilation shaft. It was a rhythmic thump slurp, closer now, followed by a faint metallic scrape against the inside of the ductwork, as if something incredibly heavy was being dragged. The sound seemed to be moving towards the hydroponics bay. My blood ran cold. The hydroponics bay was another area specifically restricted under Code Yellow, another site of mystery. Why would it be heading there? The connection clicked. The hydroponics bay, with its abundant plant life, its humid, artificially warm environment, its filtered light. It wasn't just a garden. It was a potential food source, or perhaps a secondary containment for something that thrived on similar conditions. I had to see. I had to know. The drive for clarity, even in the face of overwhelming terror, propelled me. I abandoned my station, overriding the protocol that demanded I remain there during an emergency. I grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight and a toolkit, a desperate attempt to arm myself, however futile, and set off towards the hydroponics bay. The corridors, now lit only by the pulsing red emergency lights, stretched ahead, filled with distorted shadows. Every creak of the structure, every distant hum, felt like a deliberate taunt. As I moved through the empty facility, the sounds from the ventilation system became my terrifying guide. The thump-slurp chime, rhythmic and sickening, grew louder, indicating I was closing in. I could hear it now clearly, echoing down the metallic shaft. It was heavy, deliberate, and undeniably alive. My journey was a descent into pure, unadulterated fear. What was I going to find? Was I stumbling into a trap? Was this exactly what they wanted? The stakes were no longer just my life, but the possible unraveling of the entire outpost. I reached the reinforced door to the hydroponics bay. It was sealed, but the faint, rhythmic sounds were emanating from within, vibrating through the thick steel. The panel beside the door glowed green, indicating it was still locked, but a thin, dark liquid was seeping from beneath the crack at the bottom of the door. It was viscous, almost oily, reflecting the emergency light with a disturbing sheen, like that of the creature I'd seen in Bay C. My stomach lurched. It was inside. I knew then that I had to violate the most sacred rule. I had to go in. The rational part of my brain screamed in protest, but an primal instinct, a desperate need to face the impending horror, overruled it. The creature was in there, perhaps feeding, perhaps growing, and if I didn't act, if I didn't see what was happening, then all the rules, all the caution, all the sacrifices of those who came before me would have been for nothing. I had to know what was truly at stake. The oily, reflective fluid oozing from beneath the hydroponics bay door confirmed my worst fears. The specimen I had glimpsed in containment, or one of its kind, was now loose within Outpost 73. The terrifying sounds I'd heard in the ventilation system were real. The slow, rhythmic thump-slurp chime echoing from within the sealed chamber was the sound of a predatory entity, a living void, consuming something. My rational mind screamed for retreat, to follow protocol, to initiate code black and seal myself in the control room. But the sight of that viscous, reflective seepage, combined with the escalating horror of the sounds, had bypassed my logic and tapped into a primal, desperate need for understanding, even if that understanding meant confronting pure nightmare. My goal wasn't just to know anymore, it was to face it. The stakes were no longer a potential breach, they were an active, ongoing, horrifying reality. With trembling hands, I input the override code for the hydroponics bay door. It was a code yellow restricted area, but in that moment of crisis, restricted felt like a death sentence. The heavy steel door hissed, groaning open with painful slowness, revealing a scene that would forever scar my mind. The air inside hit me like a physical blow, humid, with the cloying sweetness of decaying plant matter, mingled with a sharp, metallic tang that I later attributed to the creature's excretions. The emergency lights within the bay cast long, wavering shadows, creating a grotesque tableau. The hydroponics bay, designed to be a verdant haven in the icy wastes, was a scene of utter devastation. The rows of artificial plants, previously thriving under UV lamps, were now shriveled, blackened husks, their leaves torn and pulped. Tendrils of the oily, reflective substance coated the walls, dripping from the ceiling, shimmering in the dim light. And in the center of the devastation, surrounded by the remnants of the plant life, was the creature. It was larger than I had anticipated, a roiling, amorphous mass of shifting, reflective dark matter, roughly the size of a small car. It pulsed with an internal light, a sickly green luminescence that seemed to draw in the surrounding shadows. The receptacles I had glimpsed earlier were more prominent now, swirling vortices on its surface, distorting the light, giving the terrifying impression of countless, unblinking eyes. It was absorbing, it was consuming, and it was alive in a way that defied every biological principle I knew. The creature was actively feeding. It had extended several pseudopod-like appendages, each coated in the same viscous, reflective fluid, into the remaining plant beds, drawing in the nutrients with those chilling thump-slurp sounds. The crystalline chime I had heard was the sound of its inner workings, a bizarre, almost musical resonance that was utterly alien and deeply unsettling. As it fed, it seemed to grow, subtly increasing in size, its reflective surface becoming even more pronounced, mirroring the emergency lights in a sick, distorted kaleidoscope. The clarity test of this scene was horrifying. The creature was a consuming, growing entity, feeding on the outpost's life support, and the stake was the very integrity of the facility and all life within it. My presence, however, did not go unnoticed. As I stood frozen in the doorway, my flashlight beam a pathetic spear against the horror. One of the creature's pseudopods twitched. Slowly, with an unnerving, deliberate motion, the main mass of the creature began to turn towards me. The shimmering, reflective surface seemed to ripple, and the internal green light intensified, casting a sickly glow across the ruined bay and onto my face. It was not just moving, it was looking at me, or at least sensing me, drawn by the light of my flashlight perhaps. The rule about no direct eye contact and no reflective surfaces screamed in my mind. I was a beacon, an invitation. The terror was overwhelming, a primal, all-consuming dread that locked my muscles. I stumbled backward, dropping my flashlight, which clattered to the floor, its beam spinning wildly, creating chaotic flashes that seemed to excite the creature. It began to move faster now, detaching its feeding pseudopods from the pulp plants, its amorphous body flowing across the floor towards the door. The thumping sound grew louder, more rapid, accompanied by a new grating scrape, as it somehow propelled its mass across the metal grating of the hydroponics bay floor. I could feel the vibrations through my boots. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate for escape. I somehow managed to turn and flee, the image of that flowing, reflective horror seared into my brain. The sounds of its movement, combined with the chaotic flashing of my dropped flashlight, echoed through the bay behind me, a terrifying pursuit. I ran blindly, propelled by pure adrenaline, through the red-lit corridors, the knowledge of what I had just witnessed adding a layer of frantic urgency to every step. My only goal was to get back to the control room, initiate Code Black, and seal off the hydroponics bay, praying it would be enough. The stakes were no longer just my life, but the existence of everyone at the outpost. This was a confrontational climax, the moment where the rules and the reasons for them shattered into 1,000 pieces. As I burst into the control room, gasping for breath, my hands shaking violently, I slammed my palm down on the Code Black button. Immediately, a piercing siren wailed through the outpost, accompanied by automated voice warnings. Code Black initiated. All personnel return to designated safe zones. Hydroponics bay is compromised. Initiating full facility lockdown. Heavy blast doors began to slide shut throughout the facility, their metallic groans adding to the cacophony. On my console, the schematic of Outpost 73 showed the hydroponics bay glowing red, now fully isolated. A moment of stark clarity pierced through the panic. The rules had been broken, the creature was loose, and I was the one who had essentially opened the door to a deeper level of horror. But the nightmare didn't end there. As the main alert siren blared, the ADM system, previously struggling, utterly failed. Its warning lights flickered and died. And then a new set of alarms blared, not from the creature's movement, but from its sound. A deep, reverberating thrum began to emanate from the hydroponics bay, a sound so low it vibrated through the floor and up into my very bones. It wasn't the thump-slurp chime of active feeding, but a sustained, powerful resonance, a sound that felt like it was actively trying to unmake the outpost. It was the creature communicating, or perhaps simply existing at an amplified state. I watched in horror as the structural integrity sensors for the hydroponics bay began to drop rapidly. The reinforced walls were designed to withstand immense pressure, but this was something else. Cracks, hairline at first, then rapidly widening, appeared on the camera feeds of the inner walls of the bay. The creature's resonance, its sheer sonic presence, was literally tearing the facility apart. The hydroponics bay, our isolated garden-turned nightmare, was collapsing from within, not under physical force, but under an unseen, vibrational assault. I frantically tried to activate secondary containment protocols to reinforce the outer walls, but it was useless. The creature's destructive resonance was too powerful. The readings plummeted further, and then, with a deafening crack that shook the entire outpost, the main camera feed from the hydroponics bay went dead. The entire section blinked out on the schematic, replaced by a red, compromised marker. Silence followed, a profound, chilling silence that was far worse than the chaos preceding it. The resonance, the alarms, the wailing siren all gone. Just the hum of the remaining, still functional systems and the sound of my own ragged breathing. But the silence was deceptive. A new alert flashed on my screen, this one from the external perimeter sensors. Motion detected, far out on the ice, beyond the initial perimeter, near that heavily fortified service entrance that always puzzled me. And then another, and another. Multiple readings. They were small, indistinct thermal signatures at first, but rapidly growing in number. Whatever had been contained, whatever had resonated within the hydroponics bay, was now outside. And it wasn't alone. The true horror dawned on me then. What I had seen in Bay C, what had escaped the hydroponics bay, was not a single entity. It was a fragment, a piece of a larger whole, a part of something that existed outside the outpost, something that had been attracted by the hydroponics bay's internal light, by the accidental reflection, by Liam's tablet, by my flashlight. The outpost wasn't just containing, it was also luring. And now, with the ADM system down and the hydroponics bay compromised, the true, immense terror of what lay dormant beneath the ice, beyond the reach of human eyes, had been awakened. I was responsible for unleashing a nightmare. The silence that followed the collapse of the hydroponics bay was not peaceful. It was a vast, echoing void of dread, punctuated only by the frantic beeping of the remaining compromised sensors and the ragged gasps of my own breath. The external perimeter alerts continued to flash, a constellation of red dots indicating multiple, rapidly expanding thermal signatures on the ice. My previous understanding, that a singular specimen had escaped, shattered. What I had witnessed in the hydroponics bay was a single contained fragment that had now, through its feeding and resonance, signaled its brethren. The true scope of the threat was not within the outpost, but without, deep beneath the Antarctic ice, an entire ecosystem of these horrors. My mind, still reeling from the immediate confrontation, struggled to process the unfolding catastrophe. The power grid, barely stable, chugged along, its generators straining against the new, unseen demands. I tried to contact Dr. Reed, but all internal comms to the upper levels were dead. The code black lockdown had sealed off sections of the outpost, but it was clear now that the threat was no longer isolated. The creatures were outside, drawn by the breach, by the raw, unfettered resonance that had emanated from the collapsing bay. My goal was simple: survive. The stakes were no longer just my life, but the remote hope of warning the outside world. I knew I couldn't stay in the control room. The automated lockdown, while a shield, was also a trap. If the creatures outside could compromise the facility, I'd be sealed in, waiting. I had to get to the emergency escape vehicle, the secondary piston bully sled stored in the reinforced garage bay. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was the only option for escape. Therefore, I scrambled to gather essential survival gear: a thick parka, emergency rations, a satellite phone. Every movement was fraught with a terrifying urgency. The journey through the red-lit corridors was a blur of heightened senses. Every distant scrape, every subtle shift in the outpost structure sent my heart into a frenzy. I passed the now sealed door to the hydroponics bay, a dark, oily stain seeping further onto the floor beneath it, a permanent scar on the outpost's gleaming metal. The air still carried the faint, decaying scent of plant matter and that metallic tang. I could feel the residual vibrations in the floor, a lingering echo of the creature's destructive resonance. I focused on movement, on getting to the escape vehicle, pushing through the crippling fear. The clarity test was no longer about understanding, but about acting decisively in the face of absolute chaos. I reached the garage bay, a massive cavernous space where the snowcat was housed. The emergency lights were flickering precariously here, casting long, unstable shadows. The airlock to the outside was a colossal, reinforced door, designed to withstand the most extreme weather. I had to manually override the lockdown sequence to get the snowcat out, a process that would take precious minutes I might not have. As I began the procedure, my eyes darted to the camera feed for the escape route. The external sensors were now showing a massive, coalescing thermal anomaly just beyond the perimeter fence, heading directly towards the main vehicle entrance. It was not a single entity. It was a gathering, a swirling vortex of heat signatures moving with terrifying speed. The snowcat roared to life, its diesel engine a comforting rumble against the encroaching silence. I slammed the vehicle into gear, the treads biting into the concrete floor. The airlock doors were groaning open, slowly, painfully. I watched the external feed, seeing the amorphous mass of multiple creatures pressing against the outer perimeter, shimmering in the emergency floodlights, reflecting the light in a sickening display. They were drawn to the activity, to the light, to the prospect of a new breach. Just as the outer door ground open enough for the snowcat to pass, a violent shudder ripped through the entire outpost. The remaining lights flickered, plunged into darkness for a terrifying second, then returned. The external feed momentarily glitched, and when it resolved, the thermal anomaly was even closer, right at the outer airlock. I saw the shimmering, reflective surface, the light-absorbing receptacles, pressing against the thick, reinforced glass of the outer observation port. It wasn't just one, but many, a tide of living darkness. I floored the accelerator, driving the snowcat through the barely open airlock, leaving the outpost and my past behind. The drive across the endless, featureless ice was a blur of terror and instinct. I didn't look back. The snowcat's powerful headlights cut through the swirling blizzard, creating a tunnel of light in the vast, indifferent darkness. I pushed the vehicle to its absolute limit, the engine screaming in protest. The satellite phone was useless, no signal, probably jammed by the outpost's own failing systems, or perhaps by the creatures themselves. I was utterly alone, adrift in a white hell, haunted by the image of the reflective horrors. I drove for what felt like days, battling the elements, the exhaustion, and the creeping fear that one of them might be clinging to the undercarriage, or that they were silently flowing behind me, an inexorable tide of dread. The trauma of what I had witnessed, the absolute violation of natural order, rendered my mind an incoherent mess. I didn't know if I was escaping to safety or simply delaying the inevitable. The Antarctic wilderness, once a symbol of adventure, had become a vast, indifferent tomb. Eventually, battered and on the verge of collapse, I spotted a faint light on the horizon. The small emergency beacon of a supply depot, a contingency for stranded research teams. It was a miracle. I barely remember the details of my rescue, the incredulous faces of the supply crew, my garbled, frantic warnings about Outpost 73 and the things beneath the ice. They dismissed it as hypothermia-induced delirium, the product of isolation and stress. They didn't know. They couldn't know. The irony was bitter. I had survived, but my truth was too terrifying to be believed. I was medically evacuated, debriefed by officials who listened with polite skepticism, nodding along to my fragmented account, their eyes betraying their disbelief. Outpost 73 was officially decommissioned due to unexpected structural instability following extreme weather anomalies. No mention of specimens, no mention of rules, no mention of the things that consumed light and resonated with destruction. My story, I realized, had been neatly filed away as a psychological break, a convenient narrative for an inconvenient truth. Years have passed since then. I've tried to rebuild my life, to forget the incessant hum of the generators, the sickening thump-slurp chime, the mirrored horrors in the deep ice, but the experience left an indelible mark. I sleep with the lights on, every reflective surface in my home covered or removed. The silence of my own house is often more terrifying than any sound, bringing back the memory of Outpost 73's enforced quiet, the silence that was a precursor to horror. I constantly check the locks, double-checking, sometimes even triple-checking, not against human intruders, but against a formless, light-absorbing dread that I know, deep down, is still out there. The true horror I've come to understand isn't just about what I saw, but about what I don't see. It's the knowledge that such things exist, beyond our comprehension, patiently waiting. It's the chilling ambiguity of the world, no longer a place of predictable natural laws, but one where the fabric of reality can ripple and distort to accommodate creatures of pure nightmare. The psychological scars are a constant companion, a phantom limb of terror that never truly fades. The memory of Liam, gone without a trace, and the chilling, clinical detachment of Dr. Reed are constant reminders of the true price of knowledge and the terrifying secrets humanity keeps hidden beneath the surface of the world. Unsettling wind down 300 words, the low hum of the refrigerator, the distant drone of traffic outside my apartment. These are the sounds that populate my nights now. No longer the generators of Outpost 73, but their echoes reverberate in my mind. The ice is gone, replaced by city lights, but the cold, the deep, bone-settling cold, never truly left. It's not just the memory of the Antarctic wind. It's the chill of knowing what hides beneath the surface, what secrets the world keeps, and what happens when those secrets are disturbed. I'll never look at a reflection the same way, never trust a deep silence, never feel truly alone even in an empty room. The face of Dr. Reed, etched with an almost clinical despair, often flashes in my thoughts. She knew. She understood the true nature of the containment, the futility of the rules. Was she consumed by it too? Was she a witness to its final, devastating expansion? I'll never know. The ambiguity is its own form of torture, a constant, nagging uncertainty that gnaws at the edges of my sanity. Sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet, I swear I can still feel the faint vibrations in my floor, a deep, resonant thrum, a sound that isn't truly there, but one that has been impressed upon my very being. If this story disturbed you, you need to subscribe. I have dozens more accounts like this, some even worse. New horror stories every week. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell. You've been warned. I often wonder if they found something new under the ice after Outpost 73 was abandoned. Something more resilient, perhaps. Or maybe they found nothing at all, because the creatures simply moved on, flowing quietly beneath the frozen continent, searching for a new source of light, a new resonance to exploit. Leave your theories in the comments below. Have you ever felt that pervasive, unsettling dread that something is just wrong? Because after Outpost 73, I know it's not paranoia, it's just awareness. And I can never truly turn off the lights.